Imagine for a moment that you're in a cave 40,000 years ago. A fire crackles in the center, shadows dance on the walls, and suddenly you hear something you've never heard before. Music. It isn't the wind, nor the roar of animals, but something entirely new. A sound created by human hands, with intention, rhythm, and soul. That moment changed everything forever. Our ancestors didn't just learn how to make fire and tools, they created something that didn't exist in nature: musical instruments. It was when humans stopped being mere survivors and became artists. This is the story of how fragments of bone and stone became the first instruments of humanity. It's the story of how we discovered that we could create beauty amidst the struggle for survival. It marks the moment when our ancestors decided that being human meant more than just staying alive. 40,000 years ago, the world was a place very different from what we know today. Humans lived in small groups, hunting mastodons, gathering fruit, and battling extreme cold. Every day was a fight for survival, where finding food and shelter was paramount. But something extraordinary was happening. Amidst this daily struggle, our ancestors began to do something no other animal had ever done before: create sounds with purpose. It wasn't just yelling to communicate or scare off predators. It was something entirely new. The first instruments weren't created by chance. They were the result of careful observation of the world around them. When the wind blew through hollow bones, it produced interesting sounds. When stones were struck together, they created rhythms that resonated in the caves. When animal tendons were stretched, they vibrated in fascinating ways. Our ancestors were much smarter than we often think. They weren't primitive beings grunting and gesturing. They were observers, experimenters, and artists. They possessed the same sense of wonder we experience today when we hear a song that moves us. Archaeologists have found evidence that music appeared alongside art in cave paintings. It's not a coincidence. Both music and painting were ways to express something that went beyond basic survival. They reflected the human need to create beauty, share emotions, and connect with something greater than themselves. In places like Germany, France, and Spain, bone flutes have been discovered that date back over 35,000 years. These aren't just simple tubes with holes. They're sophisticated instruments, carefully designed to produce specific sounds. Each hole was positioned precisely to create the correct notes. If this story excites you as much as it does me, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon for more amazing content about our ancestors. Systematically, the creation of the first musical instruments was not a simple process. It required knowledge, skill, and a lot of patience. Our ancestors had to become sound engineers without really understanding what they were doing. The first challenge was finding the right materials. Not just any bone would work for making a flute. They needed long, hollow bones that were strong enough to withstand the crafting process. Bones from large birds such as vultures and cranes were perfect. They also used bones from young mastodons, which were easier to work with. The manufacturing process was incredibly complex. First, they had to completely clean the bone, removing all flesh and marrow. Then, using sharp stone tools, they had to make perfectly round holes in specific places. One mistake in measurement would result in an instrument that didn't sound right. To make the holes, they used techniques requiring incredible precision. They would heat stone tips in the fire to pierce the bone without cracking it. They'd slowly twist the tools, applying constant pressure, until the holes were just right. It was a task that could take days or even weeks. But here's the most impressive part. They understood acoustics without having words to explain it. They knew that the size and placement of the holes affected the sound. They understood that the length of the tube determined the pitch. They realized that the way they blew changed the music produced. Drums were another brilliant invention. They would stretch animal skins over wooden or bone frames and discover they could create complex rhythms. Some drums had different tensions across various parts, allowing them to produce multiple tones from the same instrument. They also created simple but effective percussion instruments. Stones of different sizes made distinct sounds when struck. Wooden sticks of varying thickness offered different rhythms. They even used seashells as natural trumpets. Archaeologists have found small bone whistles that were likely used for hunting. However, it wasn't long before they discovered these whistles could also create music. It was as if every object that could make a sound became an opportunity to create art. But why did our ancestors want to make music? It wasn't just for fun. The first musical instruments served very important functions for the survival and social organization of the tribes. Music was a way to communicate over long distances. A drum could be heard several miles away, much farther than a human voice. Tribes used specific rhythms to send messages, warnings about predators, signals that they found food, or calls to gather at a specific location. During hunts, musical instruments were strategic tools. They used whistles to coordinate the movements of the hunters. Drums could direct animals toward specific traps. It was like a military communication system, but with music. Ceremonies and rituals also became much more powerful with music. When the entire tribe played instruments and sang together, they created an experience that united all members of the group. It was a way to reinforce tribal identity and keep everyone working toward the same goals. Music also had healing functions. Our ancestors believed that certain rhythms and melodies could heal illnesses, ward off evil spirits, or assist women during childbirth. Though they didn't understand the science behind it, they instinctively knew that music affected mood and health. The mating rituals also included music. Young people would use flutes and drums to impress potential partners. It was a way to showcase skill, creativity, and dedication. If you could craft a beautiful musical instrument, you might also make a good life partner. During the long winter nights when they couldn't go out hunting, music became essential entertainment. It kept the tribes engaged, gave them something to do together, and helped pass the time during the hardest months of the year. Musical instruments were also items of trade with other tribes. A well-made flute could be exchanged for tools, food, or valuable materials. It functioned like a cultural currency that linked different human groups. Can you imagine what life would be like without music? Do you think our ancestors truly needed music to survive, or was it merely a luxury? The first musical instruments didn't just change how humans communicated, they completely transformed the social structure of the tribes. Music became the glue that held communities together. When tribes gathered around the fire to make music, something magical happened. Hierarchies blurred, differences faded, and everyone became part of something larger. It was as if music had the power to create a collective consciousness, where everyone thought and felt as one. Musicians began to hold a special status in the tribes. They were not just hunters or gatherers, they were custodians of something sacred. They were responsible for keeping traditions alive, teaching songs to the children, and leading the most important ceremonies. Music also became a way to preserve history. Before writing existed, songs acted like living books. Melodies helped remember important events, family lineages, and knowledge about medicinal plants or hunting techniques. It was a musical library passed down from generation to generation. Children learned to play instruments from a very young age. It was not just a recreational activity, but a comprehensive education. By learning music, they also learned about cooperation, discipline, memory, and emotional expression. It was like a holistic school in the form of art. Different tribes began to develop unique musical styles. Each group had its own rhythms, melodies, and specialized instruments. This helped create tribal identities and distinguish themselves from other groups. It was as if each tribe had its own sound brand. Music also facilitated cultural exchange among tribes. When different groups met, they not only exchanged goods but also songs, rhythms, and techniques for making instruments. It was a peaceful form of communication that transcended language barriers. Initiation rituals for young people almost always included music. Learning to play a specific instrument was part of becoming an adult. It was a way to prove that you had developed the patience, skill, and dedication necessary to be a full member of the tribe. If you're enjoying this content, share this video with your friends and give it a thumbs up. The story of human music is too fascinating to keep to yourself. Archaeological discoveries of prehistoric musical instruments have revealed surprising insights into the sophistication of our ancestors. Each finding shows that we have severely underestimated the intelligence and creativity of Stone Age humans. In the Hohlfels cave in Germany, a 42,000-year-old bone flute was found. When examined by scientists, it became clear that it was not just a simple tube with random holes. The holes were mathematically positioned to create a specific musical scale. It was as if our ancestors inherently understood the principles of harmony. In France, instruments were discovered that combined different materials, flutes made from bone and wood, held together with natural resins. This indicates that our ancestors not only knew how to work with one material, but could also combine different elements to create more complex instruments. Prehistoric drums found in various parts of the world show remarkably similar manufacturing techniques. This suggests that knowledge about how to make musical instruments spread across the globe far earlier than we thought. It was as if there was a musical information network connecting all human tribes. In Spain, flutes were found with carvings on their surfaces. They were not just functional instruments but works of art. Our ancestors took the time to make their instruments beautiful, not just useful. It was an expression that beauty was as important as functionality. Where analysis on ancient instruments indicates they were used extensively. They were not ceremonial objects stored for special occasions. They were everyday tools, regularly used by the tribes. This tells us that music was an integral part of daily life, not an occasional luxury. Some instruments show evidence of multiple repairs. When they broke, our ancestors fixed them time and again, instead of making new ones. This tells us that the instruments held sentimental and cultural value beyond their practical function. What do you think about the idea that our ancestors from 40,000 years ago were as creative and sophisticated as we are? Are you surprised to discover that music is as ancient as humanity itself? Looking back at these early music creators, we realize they left us with something much more valuable than mere instruments. They left us proof that being human means creating beauty, even in the toughest circumstances. The first lesson they taught us is that creativity is not a luxury but a fundamental human necessity. Our ancestors didn't wait to have comfortable lives to start making art. Amidst the struggle for survival, they found time and energy to create music. This tells us that creativity is as vital to humans as food or shelter. The second lesson is about the importance of community. The first musical instruments were social tools that brought tribes together. They taught us that humans are stronger when we work together, and that music can be the universal language that connects us beyond our differences. They also showed us that innovation springs from careful observation of the world around us. They had no manuals or teachers. They simply observed, experimented, and improved. Each instrument they created was the result of years of trial and error, curiosity, and persistence. They taught us that education should include art and creativity. Children in the tribes didn't just learn to hunt and gather. They also learned to make music. They understood intuitively that a well-rounded education must nurture both the body and the soul. Diversity was another important lesson. Each tribe developed its own musical styles, instruments, and traditions. This shows us that cultural diversity is not something to tolerate. It is something to celebrate because it enriches us all. Finally, they taught us that music transcends time and space. A 40,000-year-old flute can move us today, just as it moved our ancestors. This tells us that there is something universal in the musical experience that connects all humans, no matter when or where we live. If these reflections inspire you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more content that makes you think about how incredible it is to be human. And so, my friends, when our ancestors created the first musical instruments, they weren't just making noise. They were defining what it means to be human. They were telling us that we are more than just animals that survive. We are creatures that create, feel, and need to express our souls. Those fragments of bone and stone that became flutes and drums were the first steps toward all the music we know today. From the most complex symphonies to the simplest songs, it all started with a Stone Age human who decided the world needed more beauty. The next time you listen to music, remember your ancestors. Remember that 40,000 years ago, someone like you decided that blowing air through a bone could create something beautiful. Remember that music is not just entertainment, but a basic human need, as essential as breathing. Our ancestors taught us that in the darkest moments, when everything seems lost, we can always create something beautiful. They taught us that humanity is measured not by our ability to destroy, but by our ability to create. When the world was harsh and survival was uncertain, our ancestors chose beauty. They chose music. They chose to be human in the deepest sense of the word. And thanks to that choice, today we can enjoy every song, every melody, every rhythm that moves us. The first musical instruments were not just objects. They were declarations that being human means creating beauty, sharing emotions, and connecting with something larger than ourselves. That is our ancestors' true legacy, proof that music is the universal language of the human soul.